I think that the world really got its wake-up call to how advanced the Chinese market is around 2023, because they had been like unbelievably locked down during the COVID years, and it was closed off to the world. And then when things started reopening, and there were automotive trade shows and executives coming in from all over the world, like, oh my God, in the last 3-4 years, this country has leapfrogged everyone else in terms of its technology on offer. And I was there last year. I was at the Shanghai Auto Show and spent about 2 weeks in that country. And what I tell people is I've been covering the auto industry almost 15 years. I've been a car guy my whole life. And the stuff I drove over there and saw over there is 10 years more advanced than anything you can buy in the United States. And
that's a hell of a thing to say.
大家好，今天我们分享的是美国知名播客 Why is this happening 的一期访谈节选。本期嘉宾是华尔街日报底特律分社社长帕特里克史乔治，他深耕全球汽车行业报道近15年，常年追踪电动车、电池产业链发展，还亲自前往上海车展实地调研，近距离考察中国新能源汽车全产业链发展现状。帕特里克拥有全球多国汽车市场一线走访经验，足迹遍布欧美，国内各大车企展台。见证了全球电动化浪潮的分化格局。2023年，国内全面放开对外交流后，大批欧美车企高管、行业记者集中来华参展考察。福特 CEO 专程赴华参观，试驾国产电动车，回国后直言行业面临巨大竞争冲击。这一系列行业震动都被他完整记录、深度解读。在上海车展为期2周的实地走访中，他直观对比中美电动车技术、成本、研发效率差距，直言国内在售车型整体技术水平领先美国市场整整10年。访谈里，他完整拆解中国新能源崛起的核心逻辑，顶层产业政策扶持，完整上下游电池产业链海量本土车企充分内卷竞争，以及比亚迪等本土龙头从零布局的原生纯电造车体系。同时，他客观对比欧美发展中国家电动化进程，直指美国在电动转型节奏、基建配套、产业迭代上全面落后全球，剖析美国车企当下的发展困境与未来危机。接下来，我们就一起来看这段深度行业对话，听听美国一线汽车记者眼中中国新能源产业真实的硬实力。
I mean, EV sales have been surging in Europe. That's been true for several years now. It seems like it's really been kicked into high gear, if you don't mind the car pun, with the war in the Middle East right now, like driving their gas prices even higher, their fuel prices even higher, which had already been elevated by the war in Ukraine. And then, of course, you've got China and its unbelievably fast-moving, advanced auto industry that is scaling very quickly and not doing so with purely gas-powered cars. So it's kind of at this point like there's America and the rest of the world. And I'd add to that too, what's fascinating, what a lot of people don't realize is how much developing nations, developing markets, Latin America, India, places like that, they're electrifying very quickly too, and especially in places that didn't really ever have great gas infrastructure. They're almost skipping that step. So statistically, the US is pretty behind the rest of the world.
It's so interesting you say that, because I remember, one of the things that happened with cell phone technology is that telephony came to huge parts of the world in the global south via the cell phone before landlines, right? Like enormous, right? And cell phone adoption, particularly in some of the poorest parts of the world, is particularly true in sub-Saharan Africa, was very fast, very diffuse, and ended up in some ways kind of technologically leapfrogging certain aspects we had in the US in terms of payment systems, because they weren't dealing with some huge legacy system, because the legacy system never got developed particularly well.
Exactly so, yeah.
So let's first talk a little bit about China, because I think the China story is sort of the most important, and then we'll also reflect back on what's happening in the US. I mean, you had the head of Ford go over to China. He comes back and he gives this big speech that's like, he's seen a ghost, right? He's scared out of his mind.
In the last 3-4 years, this country has leapfrogged everyone else in terms of its technology on offer. And I was there last year. I was at the Shanghai Auto Show and spent about 2 weeks in that country. And what I tell people is I've been covering the auto industry almost 15 years. I've been a car guy my whole life. And the stuff I drove over there and saw over there is 10 years more advanced than anything you can buy in the United States. And that is the Chinese government. I can give you the whole backstory on this whole thing. Please, if you and your listeners want it.
That's what we're here for. Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite a few things. I think most people at this point know how heavily subsidized the Chinese EV market was by the government. Like they said, we want to plant our flag. We see this as the future. We want to invest in and get all these car companies moving. And this is how we're going to, grow past just making cars for Volkswagen or GM and kind of surpassing everybody else. So they got a tremendous amount of funding from the national and, local level governments to do that. But that's only part of the story. When I was over there last year, there were about 120 active Chinese brands, all competing for a pretty large pool of buyers, but an inherently limited one, like any country. So between that and just low labor costs in China and the sheer number of engineers they have and intense competition between all of those different brands, you basically had this recipe where just like this auto market moved at warp speed past the rest of the world. And the only thing I'll add to that is that wouldn't have happened, I think, if Tesla hadn't showed up in that country in the late 2010s, early 2020s, set up a factory there and got China really excited about EVs, like really, really excited. And that has been a novel thing for a lot of those auto players in China. Like they were subsidized so long. And it's like, well, now the check is due. And there's kind of a freak out because many of them are starting to fail or collapse or consolidate. I mean, again, when I was at the Shanghai Auto Show last year, it's like I walked around and I was in awe of just the volume of car brands there, the selection that those folks have are.
One of those winners clearly is a company called BYD. Can you tell us a little? They're a fascinating company, particularly from this leapfrogging perspective. A company that is approaching this from a background that has nothing to do with the internal combustion engine, which I think speaks to part of why China is doing what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Nearly every automaker out there, right, is quite old. Started in the 20th century, and then now that they're pivoting or trying to pivot to electric and hybrid vehicles. BYD started as a cell phone battery company in China, I believe, in the 90s, and so like that was always where their heart was. And then like, okay, now we're going to start an automotive arm too, and like they have been at making electric vehicles for a very long time, and like. Very candidly, a lot of their early ones were kind of terrible. Like the stuff that they came out with in the 2000s, the early 2010s even. There's a famous Elon Musk interview where he kind of mocks them and he's like, have you seen their car? But, they moved very quickly to advance that technology. And now this is a company that is really displacing a lot of big incumbents all over the world. I think especially Volkswagen has been a big victim of theirs.
Because they are selling these BYDs. I mean, you can't get them in the U.S., and we could talk a little bit why that's the case. But they do export them, right? They have big export markets for them.
They have big export markets for them, certainly, but also BYD is branching out all over the world. Like it's looking at doing production in Mexico. That's been talked about for a long time. It's launching factories in Europe now to build cars for Europeans. And it is a remarkably adaptable company. Like they have a new vehicle on sale in Europe, and it's a plug-in hybrid like station wagon. It looks like something Volkswagen would make. It looks like it's Volkswagen's bread and butter. They're going to Japan now, and they have a boxy little like minivan electric car, like a K car, like the Japanese drive. And it's like they're good at learning what the locals want. My joke was always been if BYD came to America, it would make a Chevy Tahoe competitor. And
right.
It's not completely a joke, though, I feel like.
What's fascinating to me is that, they're coming from being a cell phone battery company. And it just speaks to the fact that as an engineering product, the fundamental foundational difference between a gas-powered car and an electric car is that you don't need an internal combustion engine. Everything.
The Tesla approach and the Chinese approach is kind of you start from a clean sheet design. It starts with the battery. That's the most expensive part of the electric vehicle. And then you kind of build everything around that with fewer parts, fewer components overall, new manufacturing techniques to cut costs down. Because again, batteries are very, very expensive. It's the biggest single cost center on a car. So this was a complete rethinking of how cars are built and designed from top to bottom. And these automakers, I think have realized now it's like we can't just shove a battery into something that was meant to be a gas car and expect it to be low cost and expect it to be efficient and expect it to charge quickly. It's kind of like a difference between like renovating your house and like building a new house from the ground up.
And what we know is that often renovation is more expensive, right, than new construction.
Yes,
I mean, per square foot, like there's all sorts of costs associated. If you're designing from scratch, there's redundancies you can get rid of. Particularly at the sort of front edge of fast charging. I mean, they're charging their cars super fast. They're experimenting with, there's all sorts of experiments with different kinds of batteries that could be way less and hold more. You could start to talk about ranges of 700 miles or 800 miles on a full charge, right? There's like that frontier is very promising, but really does feel like it's happening the most in China.
It does, and there's a reason for that too. Is that it's important to remember here that a lot of the battery technology, lithium-ion battery technology, this is American technology, or was at once. By far, the most advanced type of battery chemistry and technology, and we're getting real nerdy here, Chris, so bear with me. Yeah. It's called LFP, lithium iron phosphate batteries. This is sort of meant to be this kind of like cheap workhorse battery chemistry, almost like a four-cylinder engine. It's tough, it gets the job done. This was actually invented at my alma mater, the University of Texas at Austin. And over the decades, the patents behind those batteries weren't really industrialized from what I understand. And so they were seized up by the Chinese companies instead. So they have taken this technology and run with it now. And so the bigger challenge that a lot of battery makers and automakers have is that China has a tremendous grip on the supply chain around batteries. And like, how do you contend with that? Like top to bottom, they've spent decades owning things from mining to when it ends up in your actual car.
Technologies people are trying. There's something called a solid state, right, battery that is being experimented with. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because this is one of those kind of like cold fusion ideas, but actually seems more realistic in the short term, which like we may be close to something of a breakthrough.
It's cold fusion-ish, I think is a fair way to put it. Yes, solid state if it's, and I'll spare you the chemistry. It's important to know that there have been quite a few automaker executives who have sounded the alarm about the risks to their business that the Chinese automakers represent. Again, this is a very big country with a massive industrial base. I think among the loudest has been Jim Farley, the chief executive at Ford. He was also pretty dazzled when he went to China and came and saw the competition he was up against there. And, famously, I think now imported a Xiaomi, which is a sort of Porsche-looking electric sedan made by a cell phone company in China, and drove it around Detroit for some months, and said that he liked the car so much that he didn't want to give it back. So now their challenge becomes, how do we build cars? How do we build electric vehicles the way that the Chinese automakers do, at the cost that they do, with the sophistication that they do?
There's part of it, but a big part of it is just the entire universe of manufacturing there is way more efficient, way more advanced, a lot more automated actually, and labor-free essentially than American manufacturing.
Yeah, in many ways, yes. And I don't ever want to characterize it that the Chinese auto industry is invincible or unstoppable, and it's like there have been many instances where we've seen the cracks, we've seen the slowdowns, totally. We've seen the brands fail, we've seen, experiments that didn't work out. But yeah, this is a very advanced industrial base over there that is kind of famous for moving very quickly now. I think probably a good amount of your listeners are going to be familiar with the Toyota production method and Kaizen, or just-in-time lean production, like the production methods that Toyota pioneered, especially in the 80s. And like this got applied to a lot of different industries. Like it's taught in management courses in business schools in a lot of different ways. Now we're kind of seeing like, okay, the sort of 21st century counterpart to that might be China Speed, which is just this really lightning fast approach to R&D, fixing things after the fact, often with software updates, and in the auto world, much faster development times, getting more models out more quickly. Again, because they had a very competitive market. That's something I think about a lot, and I don't have a good answer for you. I think it's one of the most defining questions facing the U.S. auto industry right now. To be clear, when we say like the auto industry in America, we're not just talking about GM and Ford and Stellantis and Chrysler and Dodge and Ram, right? We're talking about Honda, which makes most of its cars here in America that it sells here. We're talking about Toyota, which has a massive industrial base and production base in this country, which, Hyundai and Kia too. I'm pretty sure that the Ioniq 9 you own was built in the United States.
Built here,
right. All of that could be threatened by this new player coming in. So it does represent a very clear threat to their business.
I fear this world in which the US becomes this weird automotive island. Everyone else moves towards electric vehicles, partly because other countries, frankly, have more aggressive and serious commitments on climate. Also because the technology is just objectively better. It doesn't produce emissions. The stuff that comes out of a car is poisonous. You need to do a million different things to make sure that it doesn't poison you in the car, that it doesn't poison the air. We're not even talking about the carbon. We're just talking about the stuff it produces. You don't have any of that. It has way fewer working parts. It doesn't need the same level of maintenance and service.
The word now is regionalization, both because of these policy changes and tariffs. They're sort of resigning themselves to the fact that, the U.S., Europe, and China are going to be very different markets, and they have to make different vehicles for each market, and that is a more complicated, more costly process to tailor everything to these individual markets.
看完这段美国资深汽车记者的完整访谈，最震撼我的不是各种酷炫车载科技、超长续航电池参数，而是所有欧美业内人士不约而同抛出同一个核心疑问：中国新能源汽车到底凭什么实现跨越式超车？他们纠结的不只是三电、智能座舱这类单点技术优势，而是一套完整闭环、无可复制的产业发展体系。我们可以顺着访谈内容拆解清楚这套体系的核心优势。首先是顶层规划与市场双轮驱动的独特模式，很多欧美国家产业扶持要么补贴断档，要么缺少市场竞争倒逼，而国内走出了完全不同的路线。国家定向压住新能源赛道，通过税收、低成本融资扶持上下游企业，同时放开充分市场竞争。巅峰时期，国内有上百个汽车品牌同台厮杀，残酷内卷倒逼车企快速迭代技术，压缩制造成本，落后产能自然出清淘汰。这也是帕特里克在上海车展最直观的感受，同等价位的车型。国内能给到更高配置、更强电池性能，放到美国市场完全没有竞品能够抗衡。其次是全链条电池产业垄断优势，磷酸铁锂技术诞生于美国高校，却没能完成商业化落地，反而是国内企业吃透技术，从上游矿产加工、电芯制造、整车配套到储能应用，打通整条产业链，从成本控制、快充技术、轻量化新型电池研发，全部掌握在本土企业手中。比亚迪这类企业更是电池整车一体化布局，从根源上拉开与西方车企的成本差距。反观欧美车企，大多只能外购电池，供应链成本居高不下，造车天然存在短板。第三是底层造车逻辑的根本性差异。传统欧美车企根植100年燃油车工业，固有生产线，研发思维根深蒂固。转型电动车大多采用油改电方案，在空间、重量、成本上处处受限。而比亚迪等本土企业本身起家于电池制造，没有内燃机工业的历史包袱，直接以电池为核心，从零设计整车平台，精简零部件，简化生产工序，研发周期大幅缩短。访谈里也提到，欧美车企如今只能被动学习中国快速迭代的研发模式，借助 AI 仿真缩减测试流程，追赶进度，还有全球市场的差异化适配能力。中国新能源车企不是闭门造车，针对欧洲旅行车需求、日本微型 K Car、东南亚平价代步市场，都能快速开发对应车型，因地制宜调整产品。反观美国车企产品高度同质化，主打重型皮卡、大型 SUV， 电动化车型在拖拽续航、成本上短板明显，很难适配全球多数市场需求。我们再放眼全球格局，就能更清晰看到差距。欧洲依托高油价快速普及电动车，拉美、印度等新兴发展国家直接跳过传统燃油基建，一步迈入电动时代，唯独美国转型节奏严重滞后。美国市场根深蒂固的燃油消费文化，不完善的公共充电基建，摇摆多变的产业政策，三重枷锁束缚电动化发展，混动车型反而成为折中选择。 纯电普及速度持续放缓。更值得深思的是访谈中提到的行业隐忧，如果放开关税限制，国产电动车会快速瓜分美国本土市场，福特、通用、丰田、本田一众车企都会面临巨大生存压力。如今福特已经启动对标中国造车模式的平价电动皮卡登月项目，试图复刻国内低成本、高效率的生产逻辑，但追赶难度极大。欧美车企高管来华参观后，集体产生危机感，本质是看清双方产业代差。很多西方观众、行业从业者很难理解国内产业的推进效率。欧美基建、汽车产业项目动辄扯皮10几年，多方利益互相牵制，落地遥遥无期。而国内集中力量布局新能源赛道，上下游同步建设，短短10余年就建成全球最大电动车产销市场，庞大统一的国内消费市场就是产业迭代最好的试验场。海量用户需求反向推动技术持续优化，形成正向循环。很多人会简单把国产电车崛起归功于补贴，但这段访谈推翻了这种片面认知。补贴只是初期助推，真正核心是政策托底吃、市场竞争集权产业链自主可控的组合打法，私企充分竞争，产业发展方向由顶层统筹，资本无序扩张能够有效约束，避免西方资本绑架行业的困境。这也是欧美很难复刻的核心优势。就像访谈记者感慨的，未来全球汽车市场会彻底走向区域割裂，中美欧形成3套完全不同的汽车产业体系。如果美国持续固守燃油路线，长期会沦为全球汽车产业孤岛，在碳排放、制造效率、整车技术上全面落后，气候变化目标也难以完成。如今固态电池、长续航新型电池的研发重心大量集中在中国。新能源不只是交通工具的变革，更是制造业能源赛道的全球话语权之争。这段来自美国一线行业人的客观评价，抛开主观偏见，客观印证了我们新能源产业实打实的全球竞争力。这期内容到这里就结束了。如果你看完也对中国新能源产业链的发展感到震撼，欢迎点赞收藏，在评论区聊聊你的看法。我们下期继续分享海外行业视角下的中国产业实力解读。